It gives me great pleasure this afternoon to introduce our next guest speaker. It's Dr. Chris Wasden, and he's the Executive Director of the Sorensen Center for Discovery and Innovation at the University of Utah. And he authors the book, Tension, The Energy of Innovation, which is the book I think everyone by now has received, or hopefully has received. So it will be a good read for us after hearing Chris, Dr. Wasden, and hearing what he has to say about innovating technologies and business models. Dr. Wasden helps leaders across multiple industries create more innovative cultures by encouraging them to ride the innovative life cycle. He previously was a manager director at PwC and global healthcare innovation leader. As a global PwC thought leader, he focused on the role social, mobile, analytic, and cloud digital technologies, how they play a role in transforming health and well-being. Dr. Wasden has written and published over 60 articles and reports on the topic, and he speaks at dozens of events each year on how to improve your innovative capabilities and capacities. His experience has led him to advise leading companies such as MetLife, Swift, AT&T, Telefonica, Vodafone, Roche Diagnostics, and a list of many, many others. I should have been more prepared here. We're really happy to have been able to schedule Dr. Wasden. And he has a doctorate in human and organizational learning from George Washington University in Washington, D.C., an MBA from UCLA Anderson School, and bachelor's degrees in accounting and Asian studies from Brigham Young University. So quite a range of universities attended there, so a very varied background. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Wasden, and I'll turn the time over to you.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. I'm going to share with you my approach to innovation and some of the tools that I use to innovate as we think about how any organization can become more innovative. And I'm going to do this through the lens of looking at Theranos. But before I do that, I want to kind of give you my perspective on how I think about innovation. As she mentioned, I've been involved in many different startups. So some of these small companies have been small medical device companies that we've started from scratch. I started a retail kosher bakery. I think I'm the only Mormon in the world that started a retail kosher Jewish bakery. I've also been involved in some .com startups. So I've kind of got this startup background. But also, I've worked for some of the biggest companies in the world in some of their new startup initiatives as well. With JP Morgan, I started there when we were getting into investment banking for the first time in over 50 years. PwC, I started the innovation and strategy consulting practice for healthcare with them. Koch Industries, we invented weather derivatives, which is a way to hedge hot and cold days. So I know what it's like to do innovation within big companies, and I know what it's like to do innovation within small organizations you start in your garage. The principles are the same, but oftentimes the approaches that you apply are very different for those different environments. From my personal experience, what I have found is that there are two primary cycles that really drive innovation. And my book is really built around those two cycles. In fact, the original title of my book was called Riding the Innovation Cycle. And those of you that have read some or all of my book know that I use biking as a metaphor in the book because I think it's a very good metaphor for understanding how innovation works. However, when I tested the name of the book, Riding the Innovation Cycle, everyone thought it was a book about how to bike, how to buy and select bicycles and how to ride bicycles, and it wasn't about innovation. So I changed the title to really this central concept around the innovation cycle, which is tension. And there's two ways to think about tension. And normally, we as people think about tension as being a bad word. Like if I asked you all here, how many of you love tension? Raise your hands. I normally get one or two. Yeah, so I got one or two. I got a couple people there. And then I asked the next question, which is, how many of you use tension to get other people to do things? Now, if every hand doesn't go up, I know there's people that are lying in the audience, right? And then the third question I ask is, how many of you think we can eliminate tension from our lives? And no hands go up, right? So some people try to believe they can, but really we can't. And part of it is because tension is a powerful energy source that drives us forward. But there are different types of tension. And in my book, I talk about there being maladaptive tensions. Those are tensions that make us do bad things perpetually, so we continue to fail and have pain from it. There are adaptive tensions, which are those tensions that would drive us to be a little bit better. And then there's creative tensions. And creative tensions are those tensions that drive us to really come up with the disruptive, the radical, the super innovative sort of ideas. And those are the most powerful tension in our lives. And what you find with great innovative organizations is that the leadership of those organizations enable the organization, the people within it, to create and to harness these tensions to productive ends. So that what they do is they transform a maladaptive tension that has led to failure and pain into an adaptive or a creative tension that's going to lead to some level of innovation that follows. Okay? And so with the innovation cycle, what we see is that almost all innovation is really born of failure. But not all failure drives innovation. It's only those failures that create significant pain points in our lives that force us to come up with a better solution. And as we have this pain in our life on the one hand, and we envision a better life on the other hand without the pain, think of that as a rubber band that you're stretching. And the tighter, the further those rubber band ends are apart, the pain versus the future state without the pain, the more tension there is in that rubber band. Okay? And that, the more tension there is, the more creative you have to be to overcome it. And so if you overcome it through an innovation, you then generate growth. And then growth, according to the cycle of creative destruction, will then destroy the status quo and cause a new innovation cycle to take place. So that's how the innovation cycle works. The innovation life cycle says that you don't come up with a full-blown innovation you can scale overnight. That what happens is you have to have a discovery process to discover innovations. And then what you do is you then seek to de-risk these innovations in different ways. So the first type of risk you seek to eliminate is technical risk. And you do this through incubation. You create prototypes, you do pilots, you eliminate all the technical risk, and then you try to eliminate the commercial risk. That is, how will you make money on it? And so you accelerate it to come up with different business models that will then test the commercial risk to determine what will work. And then you finally get it to scaling. And scaling is where you try to eliminate all the operational risks so you can actually do it like you do your businesses every day with almost zero defects. In fact, we apply Lean Six Sigma methodologies and processes to scaling because Lean Six Sigma says that we will only fail 3 times in 1,000,000 attempts. Basically, we never fail. Okay? Now, the problem is I had a client several years ago which is a large financial services organization, and their motto was, failure is not an option. And I told them when they hired me to help them with innovation, that if failure is not an option, innovation is not an option either. Because innovation doesn't only lead to 3 failures in 1,000,000 attempts. Innovation leads to failure 90% of the time. And so what you find is that organizations that are really good on the right-hand side with scaling and applying Lean Six Sigma discipline tend to struggle with innovation on the left-hand side because they do things so well, so perfectly well, that they don't have any slack in their system. They don't actually have the capacity to really innovate. And so what you have to do is you have to enable organizations to become ambidextrous. They have to be almost flawlessly perfect in execution on the one hand, but simultaneously, they have to enable individuals within their organizations as well as the organization as a whole to somehow deal with the massive amounts of failures that occur with the innovative process. And so a lot of what I focus on in the book and the later chapters is how you do that. How do you create a discovery capability to discover brand new, wild, crazy things? How do you actually incubate those to eliminate technical risk? How do you accelerate them to figure out the business model that will make you money? And then how do you scale them to get this Lean Six Sigma, never fail sort of an approach into your business? And what you find through that process, and that's the point of all the little dots here, is that for every 1,000 ideas that you come up with, probably only 100 of them are any good. Most ideas we come up with are bad ideas. But what we do is we take two bad ideas, we combine them together, and that combination creates a child. That's ideas having sex. And those two bad ideas have a child, and you know what? That child is a better idea than the parents were. And then that child mates with another okay idea, and that has a child, and it's a better idea. And as we combine, we come up with better and better ideas until finally we end up having maybe 10 out of 1,000 ideas that we initially created that are good enough to de-risk from a technical perspective. Then of those 10 ideas that we de-risk from a technical perspective, we might have 3 that are good enough to actually put into a commercial setting to see if they'll work, and then only one of those will actually be successful as a scaled opportunity. And so the trick for any organization that wants to be ambidextrous is being able to have the processes and the structures that enable you to move from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. Now, a lot of people that I've talked to, when they've looked at Theranos, have had a lot of tension within their organizations on Theranos before all the revelations were made. And there were questions that were asked, such as, why are you not investing in Theranos? I have friends that have worked at other companies where their leadership has said, you guys are Luddites. Theranos is the future, and if you guys would just get on board and be more innovative, you would be investing in Theranos. And now, as everything's been revealed about Theranos, now people are saying, how could you have ever invested in Theranos? You are so stupid to have done that. Now, the reality is that Theranos, like any other innovative new idea, starts out with people speculating on what's possible, creating hypotheses that then need to be tested. And so what I wanted to do as our little exercise today as we chat is to take the ideas from my book and not say that I was so prescient that I never would have invested in Theranos because I'm so smart, because I'm an innovative guy and I knew that there was a fraud, and also not kick someone who's down that says these guys are so stupid, it's so obvious, and let me tell you why. But really, I have a bit of a different perspective here, and my perspective is that I look at other technologies. So this is the most successful blood testing device ever invented on the earth, I think. It's a glucometer, right? And the glucometer was invented in the 1950s. They then created a version that was used in hospitals. And then 2 companies came up with a version that patients could use themselves. And I have a friend that worked at Roche Diagnostics when they invented theirs, and he told me about the experience. And he said when the Roche came out with their AccuCheck glucometer, that physicians thought it was a terrible idea to give it to patients. Patients can't use a technology like this. People talked about how patients might bleed to death because they would do such a bad job of getting a finger prick, all right? And so this was a dangerous device. You can't allow people to use this themselves. And then patients, as we know, all patients are hypochondriacs, okay? And so they're going to use this thing too often. They're going to get results they can't trust. And then they're going to come up with all these health problems they really don't have. And so the market actually tried to reject the glucometer. The doctors rejected it. The health system rejected it. Payers didn't want to pay for it for all the reasons that I just addressed. Yet we persevered, we moved forward, and now it's probably the most successful diagnostic device ever created. Okay? So I end up having this irreverence for the status quo. Right? So anytime I see something like a Theranos that says, we're going to completely turn everything upside down and give patients more power, more information, I think that is a really cool idea. Even if I don't know anything about it, I think it's a cool idea on its face. And so, I, like all of you, before I really looked into this, I saw these magazines and I said, that's a really attractive lady. She dresses just like Steve Jobs. I'll bet she's really smart, right? And everybody was talking about how brilliant she was. She dropped out of Stanford like Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard, and Steve Jobs dropped out of his little liberal arts college. So I thought, maybe she's brilliant, and everybody says she's brilliant. And so I actually wanted to believe, right? I wanted to believe that what she was doing truly was going to be transformational and a radical innovation. But then the disclosures were made, and the Wall Street Journal started this, and Vanity Fair, published something recently, and we kind of hear what's going on. But even as I heard what's going on, I have some sympathy for her. And let me give you a personal experience that kind of caused me to have sympathy for her. About 10 years ago, I had my medical device incubator, and I was looking for new technologies that I could incubate, accelerate, and then scale into successful businesses. And I came across a technology which was an orthodontia technology, where the inventor claimed he could cut the amount of time it takes to straighten your teeth in half. I thought, that's pretty significant. 50% reduction in time. I had had braces. My wife had had braces. All my kids had braces. And I thought, you can take this from 18 to 9 months? Brilliant. So I decided that I wanted to license that technology and start a company. So I go to the University of Illinois in Chicago. I meet with them to learn about the technology. And what I find is that the inventor did tests on rabbits to make these claims. Now, rabbits actually grow new teeth like every year. So they don't really have the same sort of orthodontia that we have. All right? And not only that, the inventor left in the middle of the night and took everything with him to Columbia University. And so he didn't seem to be a very honest guy on his face. But I did some research on it, and I came to believe the mechanism of action around how you actually remodel bone in your jaw would actually work with it. And so we then did some analysis. We asked ourselves, what would the market have to believe about our technology to adopt it? We didn't ask what could our technology do and what we could prove. We first asked the business question, what would the market have to believe about our technology to adopt it? And we concluded the following: that if we could not cut the amount of time to straighten teeth by more than a third, it would not be accepted. And in fact, the magic number was 50%. We also didn't know the dosing. We didn't know if you had to vibrate. So the mechanism of action is you vibrate the jaw at a certain frequency. Okay? We weren't sure what frequency. We weren't sure the dosage. Do you do it for 5 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day? Do you have to do it 5 hours a day? Right? What we concluded, though, was that if it was more than 20 minutes a day, that it would be rejected, because that's just too much friction. So we came up with these hypotheses about what it would have to do in order to be successful. And based upon that, we went out to the investment community and said, we have a technology. It's been used in rabbits. It needs to be used in dogs, because dog is the animal model for orthodontia. It's got to be used in dogs. We think that it can cut orthodontia time by 50%, and we think you'd only have to use it 20 minutes a day, and we think the frequency you would use would be so low that it would not be annoying, right? So if it's high frequency or a loud frequency, and very rich your jaw, it's going to be annoying. And so that's what we went out with. And then we aligned ourselves with the University of Texas Dental School, with the University of Connecticut Dental School, with the University of Texas and San Antonio's Dental School. And so we found lots of partners who are now going to test our hypothesis. But when we went out, right, we didn't have any evidence to tell us that we were right. Well, we had a little bit, but we didn't have enough to know we were right. But we took a big leap. So when I heard about what she was doing initially, right, she didn't do anything different than any other innovator does, where you don't have the data and facts to support you. You merely have a hypothesis that needs to be tested. And so again, I was kind of sensitive to the fact that she wasn't that much different than me and anybody else. So then I started asking myself, so what went wrong here? And what I think went wrong here is what I want to focus on with regards to how I look at innovation. The first is, when we start a new innovative opportunity or idea, we have to discover the truth. We don't know the truth. We have to discover the truth. Okay? Just like with my orthodontia thing, I had to discover whether or not my hypotheses were true. Now, there's good news and bad news with my orthodontia story. The good news is all those three things I'd mentioned were true. The bad news is that it took us a lot longer to get through the FDA than we thought, and it took us a lot longer to get commercialization than we thought. But I had a very good experience the other day. My daughter calls me up and says, "Dad, I'm at the orthodontia." So my poor daughter, she's 28 years old. She's on her third version of orthodontia because her teeth are so messed up, they keep on moving. But so she calls me up and says, "Dad, I'm at the orthodontist." And he tells me there's a new technology out and that I would be his very first patient, and it's called the Accellident. "Isn't that the product that you brought to market?" I said, "Yes, it is." "Well, the product costs $900. Do you think you could get a founder's discount?" And I said, "I don't know. Let me call up Mike and ask." So Mike Lowe, I hired him actually out of the MBA program at Rice University in Houston. So he had gone to dental school and hated it, so he left dental school. He had joined the company that, the vibrating toothbrush, or Sonicare. He joined Sonicare when they were a young company, and he had stayed with them until they were acquired by Philips. So he was with them when they were $50 million, when they were acquired, till they got to $500 million under Philips. So he had some great experience in the space. His wife was an orthodontist. So I hired Mike the week he graduated from his MBA program to be the president of the company. I was chairman and CEO. And then when I decided I wanted to go off and work for PwC and do some other stuff, I made him the CEO when I left. So sometimes Mike's really happy that I gave him this opportunity. Sometimes he hates me because he's had to raise $50 million venture capital. It's been a very difficult ride. But now 10 years later, he's got a business that's doing about $50 million in revenue. And so, he's kind of done it. He's been successful. So I call up Mike and I say, "Mike, is there a founder's discount?" And he says, "Chris, we'll just give you one for free. Tell me the orthodontist's name and I'll just mail it to him." So I was actually very proud that my daughter could go to the orthodontist and say, "My dad's company started this." And so my daughter's actually finished 9 months. She's been told by the orthodontist the treatment's done. So I have my own personal story that it worked. She's now his poster child for the technology because he wants to use it on other patients as well. All right, so what I did with that is I triangulated. I didn't know the truth, but I discovered the truth by triangulation. And I triangulate a couple of different ways. One is that all innovations require three processes to occur. They require variation. You've got to have lots of different points of view. That's why when I took my technology that was invented by one guy, I got University of Texas in Austin, I got University of Texas in Houston, I got University of Connecticut, all to be partners with me to triangulate to come up with this variety of ideas. Then you've got to have interaction. You have to have all these different variety interacting with one another so that new ideas are created. This is the ideas having sex sort of thing. But then you have to select. You've got to select the best ideas out there to then figure out how to have the new ideas kind of mate and improve and improve. So these three processes have to be in place to be innovative. Then the other thing you do is you've got to take any of your ideas and you have to apply three different logics to the idea. You have to look at the problem and the idea, the solution, from a deductive perspective, that is a top-down, an inductive, a bottom-up, and an abductive. And so when we think about these different processes, what we're doing is we're triangulating, saying, again, I don't know the truth, but if I look at it from the top down, the bottom up, and then I look at patterns that occur out in the world, I'm going to be able to deduce whether or not one thing is better than the other, one thing is true, one thing is false. And so those processes were really not in place with Theranos. And so now I'm going to go through my process that I do. I have 10 questions you need to ask every time you look at a new innovative opportunity or you want to create a new innovative opportunity. And these 10 questions I call the 10 P's and Q's. The P is that every one of the areas of focus starts with the P. You'll see that in a minute. And then every one of them have a question that's associated with it you have to answer. And part of the reason that I focus on this triangulation, the 10 P's and Q's, is that too often, and Steve Jobs has made a great point of this. He says, too often when we see a problem, what we do is we immediately jump to a conclusion as to what the best solution is. And that's almost always wrong. If it's a really new, thorny problem. If it's a simple problem we solve every time, you're almost always right. But if it's a new problem, we're almost always wrong. Then what people do is they say, okay, that first solution to a difficult problem didn't work. So what I'll do is I'll take 4 or 5 different solutions to things like this, and I'll combine them into a kind of a Rube Goldberg sort of solution. And then I'll try to solve it with this really complicated, complex solution, and that also is almost always wrong and fails. He says only those people that hang with a solution for a long time and really come up with simple, elegant solutions really solve the problem. And that's what I refer to when I talk about creative tension, is this tension that you have that forces you to hang with the problem long enough to come up with simple, elegant solutions to your problem. So what I do is I take any sort of problem and I first look at it from my business model perspective. And I say, where are we trying to solve the problem? Who are the stakeholders involved? And how would I describe the problem to all the different stakeholders, the partners, the channels, the customers? Then the second question I ask is, why would we win if we had a problem to the solution? And here I'm looking at what are all the benefits that would be created by this solution. And so I look at what is my point of view. Is my point of view truly differentiated from existing point of views? I look at the value chain. I look at how we would really create a secret sauce that would be different. I look at what is the value proposition. And I have a model or a tool I use called the 5 C's of a value proposition. And I say, what are the value proposition C's that would really solve this problem in a compelling way? And then I look at what sort of position we would have within the marketplace. Do we actually change industry structure? And if we can answer those 3 questions, then we understand the benefits that we're going to be delivering through our new innovative solution. Then I look at our capabilities. And what you find with any sort of new product is that you've got to define the features, functions, and benefits of this product in a way that customers can understand it. And increasingly, almost every product has a digital incarnation. And so I also focus a lot on what are the digital success factors that would make that product successful. I then look at what people and partners we would need to be successful, because generally with a new opportunity, you have to have new people and new partners as part of this. I then look at the process and plan, and then that tells me my capabilities. And then finally I look at what do we win if this solution is successful in the marketplace. So I look at the economics of it. I look at what are the possibilities. How big could it be? Is this a huge opportunity or a small one? I then look at promoting it. How would we promote it, and who actually gets rich based upon this being successful? And then I look at the profits. How much money do we make, and how do we make that sort of money? So that's my business model framework, where there's 4 dimensions of a business model, 4 primary questions I ask with the underlying questions with it. So when we look at problem, I'm looking at a problem at 3 levels of abstraction. I'm asking, what is the societal problem that exists in this area? What is the organizational problem that companies within society have? And what's the individual problem that people have? So this macro societal level is your deductive analysis. The individual level is the inductive analysis. And the abductive analysis is looking at what other companies do. So when we look at the lab business, what we know is that about 2% of all healthcare spending is on labs, but it drives 70% of the decisions. So when we think about the problem in labs, I struggle to really believe that we think that cost is a major problem. Now, we can always make things cheaper and better, but it's a fairly small expenditure, and it's really, how does that small expenditure drive the bigger expenditure? So that's really the bigger problem, I think, is understanding the correlation between those things. And then part of that is actually what's driving this whole area of point of care of testing, where we're trying to get testing now to the lowest level so it can be more immediate like everything else in our lives. What's happened with Google and Facebook and Instagram and Amazon and all these other digital companies is they've taught us to be really impatient. We want everything now. And so healthcare is now struggling because we as consumers have a digital experience in every aspect of our lives but healthcare. And we're asking ourselves the question, why can't healthcare be like every other part of our life? And so we demand answers now. And so you have this push towards using digital technology in a way that's going to give us what we expect in our lives. Now, Eric Topol is at Scripps. Many of you probably heard of him. He's written several books now on digital innovation in healthcare. He's a friend of mine. He and I sit on a common advisory board together for Qualcomm Life. And as we were talking about Theranos, he made a very interesting observation to me that I hadn't really thought about. He says, I do not think, and he did this 2 years ago before all this stuff came out in the news. He says, I don't think that Theranos will really be a disruptive, important innovation in the marketplace because there's nothing in Theranos that really takes advantage of digital technology. Okay? He says, if you look at this curve on the right-hand side, and by the way, I have a very strange hobby. You're going to see a lot of exponential growth curves. I actually collect exponential growth curves as a hobby. All right? So if you go to my Pinterest wall, you'll see thousands of exponential growth curves that I collect. And the reason that I collect these exponential growth curves is that exponential growth curves are a leading indicator of disruptive change. So anywhere you see a curve like that, you know people are going to be disrupted. So I'm always looking for those curves that are going to be leading indicators of disruption. So that red line there is the year that Theranos was started. And as you can see from that curve, which the green line is the mobile growth in the market, Theranos was created before there was mobile, right? So Theranos never had, as part of their core strategy, a mobile strategy. And mobile, digital, we'll call it, is really what's becoming the most disruptive factor, not only in our normal lives, but also increasingly in healthcare. So it caused me to think, Eric's point of view about digital innovation and a company that is focused on disrupting the lab industry, but actually doesn't have a digital strategy, could they really be that disruptive? The other thing I looked at is we've all seen this decline in the cost of genomic testing. When Theranos was started, it was still costing over $1 million to do a genome sequencing. In fact, probably closer to $1 billion. But since that time, you've just seen the collapsing. In fact, I'm not sure there's any technology whose cost has collapsed faster than DNA testing, DNA sequencing. You see that kind of grayish blue line is Moore's law, which we always point to as being this double exponential improvement in capacity and cost. But genome sequencing has significantly outpaced it. And then you look at the number of gene tests that have been offered. When Theranos came out, there were less than 1,000 gene tests on the market, and now there's many more thousands out there. The other thing I looked at is the microbiome. We see lots of research about how the microbiome is actually more indicative of my health issues as well as my health cures. I love to talk to my kids about how they need a fecal transplant because they have all these gut problems, right? But when you look at the research on the microbiome, there's almost nothing out when Theranos was there. And now you see all the references that are out there. You see new applications and whatnot. And so how disruptive could something be that didn't include this as well? You also see the explosion of data, not only in the world generally, but in healthcare, this explosion of data. And so anyone that doesn't have a really sophisticated data analytics capability also, I don't think, would be that disruptive in the lab space. The other thing I looked at from an organizational level is I tried to figure out how big of a problem they were solving for the majority of the people in this space already. And so they made claims that they were going to decrease the cost of a lab test by 50 to 80% versus the CMS payment levels, and they would have direct-to-consumer lab testing. I did a project for one of the largest academic medical centers in the United States several years ago, where we looked at how we would eliminate all unnecessary diagnostic testing. And the CEO at the time had all the department heads throughout the hospital come up with a list of all the unnecessary tests that they could eliminate. So as we looked at all the tests and we calculated it up, what we found is that this academic medical center would go bankrupt if they eliminated all unnecessary testing. Okay? Healthcare systems only have profit margins of 3%. Lab testing is what makes them solvent. Okay? So presenting to them that you can decrease the cost of these tests, which actually costs our revenues, right, to these hospitals, so that if you eliminate revenues by 50%, that has a huge negative impact on businesses that are basically at break-even profitability to begin with. So I'm not exactly sure these organizations would be that interested in their testing. So then I looked at the individual problem. And clearly, Elizabeth talks about how she has a needle phobia. She doesn't like needles. We all have these. I mean, I don't like needles either, I guess. And so there's clearly a pain point there that's being addressed. But as I'll show in the proposition stuff, I'm not exactly sure that she addressed that pain point in an effective way. So when I looked at the problem, I wasn't sure exactly that she was really addressing some of the real important problems that are coming up with diagnostics. So then I asked, so what is her point of view? What is Theranos' point of view when we look at the industry value chain, we look at the company value chain, that would really be that much different than the current point of view in the marketplace? So again, the point of view is I can take a drop of blood and I can do hundreds, maybe thousands of tests. So that's a pretty interesting point of view, right? Not a lot of people have that point of view. So then I looked at how is that being implemented in the market. So the top red is the current value chain of the lab testing business, right? You order a lab generally by a physician. You visit a lab by the consumer to get the blood drawn. It's drawn by a phlebotomist or someone like that. You transport it. It goes to a reference lab. It's analyzed, and then it's reported back to the physician. When you look at what Theranos was doing, they didn't change hardly anything. So they said, well, we'll do this in Arizona because consumers can order their own lab tests. Okay, that's nice. I mean, personally, again, I'm one of these heretics that doesn't think a doctor has to do everything in my life. So I want to be able to do more of it myself. So I want to be able to order my own lab tests. So I think that's great. Visit the lab, so retail locations. So she had deals with Walgreens. So that's more convenient because there's more Walgreens than there are doctor's offices for me to go to or lab locations. So that's good. But then the workflow is pretty much the same. And at the end, she gives me the report myself. I don't have to wait to get it from my doctor. So I think that's good. So there's some incremental improvements from my perspective on the value chain, but nothing that's revolutionary. Right, so if I were to think about what would a revolutionary change in the value chain be, so what point of view would really disrupt this industry, my view is that labs could be ordered by physicians, the consumer, you could buy a microfluidic chip online, and that would actually come to your house, that you wouldn't need to go to a lab at all. You could actually do it at a physician's office, your home. Consumers could do it themselves. The blood drawn, again, it could be done at a clinician's office. It could be done in home with this microfluidic chip. No transportation required. Analysis could be done by my supercomputer in my pocket. And then the reporting would be instantaneous at the physician's office of the consumer. So now a lot of you guys are more, in fact, all of you guys are more experts about this than me. So you can say Chris is crazy. That's okay. But the point is, this is a disruptive innovation, right? If you look at all those grayed out areas, we actually eliminate that part of the value chain and we radically transform all the rest. So when I'm looking for a disruptive innovation, I'm looking for something that radically changes the value chain, not something that makes a few tweaks here and there on the value chain, because that's not going to radically disrupt anybody. The other thing that I looked at is I've been interviewing a lot of different people about the future of revenues in the lab area. And I've been kind of shocked by this falling cost of genomics and wondering how will we ever make any money on genomics if basically these tests become ubiquitous and free, right? So who makes money on a free test? I don't think anybody. And then I look at the traditional IVD and kind of where is the money there, and then I look at microbiome. And again, I'm a big believer in triangulation. So I personally believe that increasingly we're going to see a world where we triangulate towards diagnoses using multiple different approaches, and we already do that to a large extent today, but we'll be doing it more and more with microbiomes and genomes, I think. And I've come up with the point of view, and I may be completely wrong, and I'm willing to admit that if I am, if somebody convinces me, but I think that the IVD is actually going to be really the thing that drives the revenue, and the other things are going to be more a complement to the IVD part of the business, okay? So proposition. So what is the underlying, the core value proposition? And here I look at 5 C's of value proposition. I look at what is the cost to the consumer, how convenient is it, how much faster, easier, closer, simpler is it versus the current alternative, how much confidence do I have that it's actually going to be right or good or effective. Then I look at what sort of compensation, who's going to make money by promoting this in the marketplace, how much money am I going to make, if at all, in this approach? And then how is it connected? How is it connected digitally, technologically? How is it connected kind of from a brand perspective? So I read a bunch of customer reviews on Theranos, and I found some shocking things from that. So first on the cost, 261 tests, the cost the same as those offered by other reference labs, but customers see it as low cost. But you know what? Customers kind of don't matter because customers don't pay, right? Consumers don't pay. So I don't care if the test costs $1,000 or $10 as long as I don't pay. Now, in a high deductible health plan world, I do pay, and so I do care. So it's a function of whether or not the customer bears that cost. But so far, I didn't see anything from a cost perspective that seemed to have a value proposition to it. On the convenience side, this was what was really shocking. Vigorous, this is a quote, vigorous milking of blood from my finger. It was unpleasant. I prefer the single pinch of a needle. My visit to Theranos lasted a little over 1 hour. This was longer than my visit to Quest Diagnostics. So again, you would think, right, this convenience value proposition, a little thing like a glucometer, a little prick of blood, very fast, very easy, but that's not what consumers were saying. And then I look at confidence. The Stanford results had changed, but not significantly. So this is someone doing side-by-side tests, basically. The Theranos results, on the other hand, were strikingly different from both the Stanford results and the previous day's Theranos results. So 2 days, same test, and significantly different results. So confidence was a real problem. Compensation, I mentioned the hospitals make less money, so that's not a great thing for them as a customer. And then connection. And this was also shocking to me. It goes back to the Eric Topol comment about concern that Theranos was not a digital company. The inability to accept electronic orders from a walk-in customer and their seeming reliance on legacy technology, paper and fax machines. I'm looking at my lab test results on the Theranos website 5 hours after my finger prick. So that last statement, that's good. In fact, I would like us all to be able to get our lab results instantaneously. But the fact that they had legacy technology and they weren't digitally native was shocking to me given how young the company was and that they raised hundreds of millions of dollars. And then the Wall Street Journal reported on the test results from this confidence thing. And what you know as experts in the lab business, all of you, is that it almost doesn't matter about the cost, the convenience, the compensation, and the connection. If confidence is a loser, it's a loser. Right? And so the test results from a confidence perspective were so negative that you couldn't have confidence in the value proposition at all. So then I looked at the next thing, which was the position. What is the industry structure like with the buyers, the suppliers, the competitive rivalry? As we know, there's 4 major reference labs out there. There's some other smaller ones. They're a large portion of the industry. And then you've got all the hospital-related tests. And it was unclear to me exactly how they thought they were going to fit in with this sort of industry structure and really be a disruptive force in it for many of the reasons I mentioned earlier. So then I look at the product. And from the product perspective, I look at these digital success factors. And so I have 6 of them. So the first one is, how integrated into your workflow or lifestyle is the technology? And here I'm looking at what I call physical friction. And what you saw from the customer reviews is that the physical friction seemed to be about the same as the current labs. Okay? So I didn't see there any improvement in digital integration elements there. Interoperability, I'm looking at digital friction. So I'm looking at how the electrons flow from collecting the information to sharing with different sort of people. And there, again, they seem to be worse than others out there. They weren't digitally native. I'm looking at intelligence, and that is the mental friction. So how do you make the results of a test easier for me to understand? I didn't see a lot of analytical informatics with their business, so I kind of said, well, maybe it's as good as the existing status quo, but it doesn't seem to be any better. I look at outcomes, so transparency, friction. So how do you make things completely transparent and obvious? And here they were doing a better job. They were getting lab results to consumers faster and to physicians, presumably. Socialization, I'm looking at how you eliminate social friction so you can share that information with lots of different people. They seem to be doing that a bit better. And then I looked at engagement with regards to how do you make it a fun, engaging experience, if you can make something painful, fun, and engaging. But they were trying to represent that they did, and it looked to me, based upon the consumer reviews, that at best it was the same, not really an improvement. Then what I look at is I look at what is their process and plan to come to market. So how are they going to move from an initial idea and go through what I call fast, frequent, frugal failure to move the idea forward through multiple, we call them MVPs, minimum viable products, to get to market. So this innovation life cycle. Now I make a statement here which maybe is too bold, but it's almost unprecedented that a diagnostic company would take so long with so little evidence to produce so little. So when you think about it, hundreds of millions, they could have produced a blockbuster drug on the amount of time and money that they spent. A blockbuster drug in the pharma industry. So I look at that, and you got all these different touch points, but I didn't really see a good discipline around the innovation life cycle where they were constantly testing it, applying fast, frequent, frugal failure to move the ideas along to get to a scaled opportunity. And again, they had ample money and they had ample time, and it just didn't happen. So I was concerned about their process and plan approach. I then looked at people and partners, and I asked myself, do they have the right team to pull this off? So I looked at their board of directors before they restructured their board and then afterwards. When you look at these board of directors, there's some very impressive names on it. Henry Kissinger, right? He's a smart guy. But he was a smart guy when I was 10 years old, right? And I'm sure that he's still a smart guy, but he's over 90 years old. He's on 296 boards. So he basically goes to a board meeting every day of the year, right? Right, at 90, right? So I look at him. I look at some of these other people. It's kind of the same sort of MO. You look at George Shultz, right? 99 boards that he's on. And he's ripe old age of 94 years old at the time that this was done. So I looked at that, and I look at my own experience as I was an entrepreneur. When I would create my board of directors, I did it specifically to try to get other people to invest in me, which is what she did, right? So my objective was the same. However, my focus was on putting people on my board that had relevant domain expertise so that they actually could create tension. Now, sometimes the tension of a board is awful and more than I ever wanted. But again, I believe in tension. So I would put people on my board that would force me to be better, right? And that knew a lot about the domain that we were focused on. I look at this board and I don't see a board that's generating creative tension. And so the people side of it just didn't seem to be the right sort of people. And we can also read about other employees they had and whether or not they were the right people. But then I also look at the quality of the people that have invested in you. Because as an entrepreneur, I'm always focused on representing that, look, I got these smart people, the smart money to invest in my idea. Therefore, you can have some confidence that this is not a stupid idea. The reason there's only one icon on this page is because that was the only smart money invested in the company. And you can even debate whether or not DFJ was smart money. They came in very early. They didn't put a lot of money into it. And so you actually read the interviews of people at Google Ventures and other places that turned it down, and you realize that all the smart money that is invested in diagnostic technologies over decades in Silicon Valley had no interest in this company. So if they don't have any interest in this company, why should I have interest in this company? But here's the shocker. She got the vice president to be interested in the company. She got Hillary Clinton to be interested in the company, but they weren't able to protect her from the FDA. She got Walgreens and Safeway to make hundreds of millions of dollars of commitments. I mean, I only wish in my wildest dreams I could be that good. This is remarkable. If you've ever tried to get a Fortune 500 company to back your new venture, and I have tried, right? It is really, really hard. I had Medtronic as a distributor of my medical device product with a previous company I had. That took me years to get them on board. They did tons of due diligence. They had their venture team down checking me out. They had their salespeople test drive my product for a while. They had their salespeople sell my product for a while, kind of on a speculative basis. It is really, really hard. So I saw this and I was shocked that she could pull this off. This is truly remarkable. But again, it wasn't enough. So then I look at possibilities. And the question I'm asking there is, how big of an opportunity could this be? Now, we all know that the size of the market, this was in 2012. Now they say it's about $75 billion in size. Is the innovation that she is coming up with going to make the market bigger? Or is it merely going to kind of rearrange the deck chairs, if you will? And if it actually decreased costs, revenues, the amount that she said, it actually could make the market smaller. That's not a bad thing. Innovators do that all the time. And it's very disruptive when they do that. But again, I wasn't exactly sure how she was going to do this with a CLIA-type lab test, right? To really disrupt a market like this, you have to have more of a kitted test, not a CLIA lab test. So then I looked at promotion. How do you actually promote it and get people to change their behaviors in the marketplace? On the right-hand side, you see the adoption of all the things that we have in our homes. Refrigerators, air conditioners, TV sets, smartphones, computers, things like that. And you notice that these lines go almost straight up. In all the normal technology parts of our lives, we adopt stuff really, really fast, like in years, sometimes months, okay? On the left-hand side, you have the adoption of the MRI. You notice those lines are almost kind of flat lines? In healthcare, we don't adopt stuff very fast. So anyone that comes into the healthcare industry needs to appreciate the fact that while we all say we want an Amazon experience in healthcare, whether or not we're willing to adopt it as quickly as we would Amazon, the healthcare industry isn't able to provide it as quickly as Amazon provides it. And so the adoption of any new technology takes at least 10 years, if not longer, in the healthcare industry. So you have to understand the adoption and the promotion and how you get people to use it. And then finally, I look at profits. So I took the most recent valuation while she was still in the Forbes 400 of wealthiest people in the world, and looked at the valuation of the company, and I compared it to the other reference labs. And so if we kind of move from left to right, so market share based upon number of tests of Quest and LabCorp are roughly kind of 10-12% market share. Their market caps are $10-12 billion. They have revenues of $7.5 to $8.7 billion. They have profits and profit margins of 10 to 5%. They have a PE ratio, which is the value that the market puts on the company, of 13 to 27 times. And then the number of annual tests that they do is about 1.5 billion, 1.7 billion. So the average price per test is about $5. So that's the simple math for the two large publicly traded reference lab companies. So then I said, okay, let's assume that everything about Quest and LabCorp is true and factual. And now what does that imply with regards to Theranos? Well, let's say that Theranos, they said they're going to decrease the cost of a test by 50%. So if we take that $5 and cut it in half to $2.50, that implies they have to do twice as many tests as Quest. They have to do 3 billion tests a year. And let's assume that they're valued at 12 times, and they have a 10% profit margin. So the same profit margin as Quest, so the highest level. So I'm giving them benefit of the doubt. I'm a little conservative on their PE. That would imply revenues that would be equal to Quest with profits equal to Quest, which would then give them the market cap of $9 billion, which is what they were valued at, which means that Theranos would have to have a 20% market share to justify a $9 billion valuation. So if I'm this most recent investor that I think invested $300 million, so when is Theranos going to get a 20% market share that's going to justify that level of valuation? So for me, the numbers just didn't make sense either. So we went through the other 9 questions, but then I got to this last question. I tried to do the numbers, and I'm not trying to be really sophisticated, and some people have seen these numbers that I've shared, and they say, well, they were going to create this Edison machine. They created the Edison machine. They're going to have the Edison machine. They're going to sell gazillions of these things, but still at the end of the day, it's doing tests, and it's getting market share, and I just couldn't see how you could justify that sort of evaluation given the industry structure, given their business model. So in conclusion, as I kind of wrap all this up, I look at innovation in a certain way where I think that Innovation follows a cycle. It's driven by tension. There's ways that you can ask 10 simple questions to understand whether or not you've got a good or a bad opportunity and whether or not you're going to have success with it, okay? And what we need and what you need as an innovative organization is you need to think about innovation more from a prospective than a retrospective manner. And what I mean by that is the following. Oftentimes, in fact almost always, all of us are so involved in running the business of today that we don't have any time, we don't have any bandwidth to focus on the business of tomorrow. And so what happens is we wait for the business of tomorrow to be created by somebody else to then impact us. And then we respond to it reactively. We're not proactive, we're reactive. Instead, what I find with great innovative organizations is that the leadership of the organization is looking prospectively. They're looking into the future. They're saying, how do we see the industry changing? And so I mentioned some technologies, genomes, mobile, digital, biomes. How do we see the world changing? How do we now need to understand how that will create failure and pain for our organization, for our customers? And then how do I bring that as a leader? How do I bring future pain into the present and impose it on my people in such a way that it generates creative tension? So that my people now are driven to be creative geniuses to come up with innovative ideas. Because if I just wait for the world to impose its change on me reactively, I'm always going to be behind. I'm always going to be playing catch up. But if I'm actually more prospective, proactive, I can bring future failure to the present, and we can then innovate to come up with new ideas. And those new ideas will transform any industry. What this requires you to be is ambidextrous. And being ambidextrous is really hard. Anybody that tries to write with two hands at the same time knows how hard it is, right? Most people are not ambidextrous. But great innovative organizations are ambidextrous. And they're ambidextrous in a couple of different ways. One important way, in fact, I think the most important way, is that they allow all people in their organization to express their creative genius in areas that will make a difference. And so the metaphor that I use in my book is biking. So if we think about biking, there being 4 different types of bike. The stationary bike is the bike that most of us ride every day at work. It's a very safe bike. It never crashes. It doesn't even have wheels, right? It's got a very stable frame. It's got adjusters, so I can put the seat exactly where it needs to be with 6 Sigma precision. I can put the handlebars exactly where they need to be. I can control the tension knob, so I have perfect tension to achieve perfect results from a stationary bike. Now, the problem with a stationary bike is it's really boring, right? You don't discover anything new with a stationary bike. On the opposite end of the spectrum is a mountain bike. Mountain bikes have big knobby tires. They've got disc brakes. They've got a rugged frame. They're actually built for failure. They're built for risk. I chipped my tooth in half mountain biking 2 years ago. Okay? I get hurt all the time mountain biking. But you know what? The views are amazing. The experience is amazing. Between the extreme of the mountain bike and the stationary bike, we have other types of bikes that have different levels of risk and provide different levels of opportunity. You have a hybrid bike, which you can use on trails. They have the mountain bike frame, but they have the wheels of a road bike. So they kind of are good for trails and for roads, but not really tough trails. Then you have a road bike, and I'm more of a road biker. Road bikes go fast, which is fun. I got up to 50 miles an hour once. My wife doesn't know, but I got up to, and they're very sleek, they're aerodynamic. And you know what? The reason I love road biking is because it's mindless. And because it's mindless in the action, I can be mindful in my thoughts. So what I do before I go out and do a road bike is I will sit down and I will review something I want to think about creatively. I hop on my bike and I go do 30 or 50 miles, and I come up with tons of ideas because I'm mindlessly biking while I'm creatively thinking up ideas. Okay? What we need to allow to happen in our organizations is we need to allow our people, anyone who wants, to hop off the stationary bike from time to time and hop on a mountain bike or a hybrid bike or a road bike and discover and create new ideas, new opportunities, new solutions that can then help the organization become more innovative and creative. And if we can allow our people to do that, we can become an ambidextrous organization. But to do that requires some discipline. And it's not Lean Six Sigma discipline. It's not the stuff you do to run the business of today where you guys run that perfectly and flawlessly. Because it's a discipline that has to enable you to fail 90% of the time and not blow up the company. Okay? So what I do with organizations is I help them understand what is an innovation discipline versus a lean discipline. How do you actually create an innovation discipline with the process, structures, practices to enable people to be innovative while at the same time running the business of today? And that's how you become ambidextrous, by enabling anybody in the organization to be ambidextrous to create the business of tomorrow. Because something she said that I completely disagree with, and to a certain extent, I mean, I know where she's coming from because I've used the same quote before. As you've heard the story, and I don't think it's apocryphal, I think it's true, but when Hernando Cortez came to Mexico, he burned his ships. Now, you might think that's crazy, right? Because how are you going to go back to Spain if you burned your ships in Mexico? He did not want his people to believe they had any other option than success in Mexico. And so if you burn your ships, you're not going back home. You've got to make it work there. So on the one hand, I can understand why she says the minute you have a backup plan, you've admitted you're not going to succeed. But at the same time, I've started a dozen different organizations. And as the CEO of those organizations, I've always got a backup plan. Because you know what? Sun Tzu said this in The Art of War. He said, no plan succeeds after contact with the enemy. All plans get changed. Okay? So you come up with the best plan, but then you encounter real life, and all of a sudden the plans have to change. So you've always got to have a backup plan, and you've got to have a plan B. As I look at ARUP, you guys are a large, successful, fast-growing organization. You've got to have a plan B around innovation. You've got to figure out how you can take all these new technologies that are coming out and apply them in novel ways to come up with the organization, the company of tomorrow. I've shared with you kind of my framework on how to do that. You've got my book, which is kind of my approach to that. And so I welcome you to think about that and how you would apply it. But this is a very exciting area of healthcare and medicine, and I think there's great opportunity, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. So any questions before I go teach my class on innovation over to you? Yes? So, and I'm going to give you some names, but then people say, but what about this, what about that? I think Google has a very good discipline around innovation, right? They allow almost anybody, they focus primarily on engineers, but they allow almost anybody to hop off the stationary bike and hop on the mountain bike and explore things. They are doing lots of creative, innovative things in non-traditional areas. They're restructuring from Google to Alphabet. In my characterization of it, it's applying the innovation life cycle. So they're saying, no, we're going to actually take all these things that we're discovering, incubating, accelerating, and bring them out so we can show the discipline in our process. So I think that you look at the array of things they're working on, and truly, the stuff that they're working on is disruptive and transformational, right? Now, the pushback I get from people is they say, yeah, but 98% of the revenues come from paid search. True. They have not learned how to monetize these things in ways that make a lot of money. But even there, I would challenge that point of view. So if you take Android as an example, they acquired Android. Why did they acquire Android? Because they knew that mobile is the future. And so they had to have a mobile strategy because all advertising was going to go mobile. So had they not innovated in mobile, that 98% of revenues coming from mobile would be from paid search would be 98% of a much smaller pie, right? And so then they create a business model around Android that makes them $1 gazillion. You look at what they're doing with autonomous driving, right? So they're creating the operating system that they're going to give away. So they haven't said this, I'm just throwing it out there. But they could give the operating system of autonomous driving away for free, kind of like Android, and make money in other ways, right, with your free time that you have in your car. So if you think about what autonomous driving is really about, it's about having everybody on the planet have 2 extra hours to search on Google. That's their business model. That's their plan, right? And we see them getting into healthcare in lots of interesting and innovative ways. Again, they've not been able to commercially monetize it, but they have gotten some very sophisticated healthcare players to become their joint venture partners on some of these things. So when I look at organizations that are good at applying the innovation life cycle and good at harnessing tension, I mean, Google is a very creative, tension-driven organization. I think that they're a good example of that. Yeah, so, yeah, Google is a healthcare company. So, I think that there are some of the big pharma companies that are trying to do this. They're trying to figure out how to incorporate these new technologies in ways that transform their business model. The problem is that, actually, I'll say Medtronic. They're not a biotech or pharma company, but they're a medical device company. I think Medtronic's probably one of the best healthcare organizations that do that. When you look at how they're trying to transform the patient experience, they're focused on remote monitoring. They're moving beyond just remote monitoring of pacemakers to remote monitoring of other vital signs, providing coaching to patients. When you look at the business model innovation that they've been doing in Europe, where they'll go to a government and say, I'm going to write you a check today for 25% cost savings for your entire cath lab, and I'm going to give you that check today, and now you're going to give me the cath lab, you're going to give me all the physicians, all the nurses, all the equipment and everything, and now it's my problem to figure out how to run that in such a way that I make more money than the check that I just wrote you, right? I mean, that's very disruptive. They're taking all the risk of that, and they're delivering outcomes and results, okay? There's a case study that I use often with Merck Sirona around growth hormone therapy, where they've completely created the value chain for growth hormone therapy with regards to molecular diagnostics, wireless devices for injection, EHR integration, reimbursement and whatnot. So I think there's a few out there that are showing the way. I think Medtronic's probably the best at doing it in a holistic way across many. You look at what they're doing in diabetes as well. I mean, they are truly trying to transform the patient experience. Any others? Yes? Yeah. So I am a firm believer that innovation loves constraints. Okay. So the first thing that I do is I say, okay, let's think about a problem that ARUP has that we can put constraints around. It's got to be 50% better or 20% slower or faster or whatever. And then let's do an innovation challenge with all the employees in ARUP, where we say, here's the problem that we want to solve, and in order to solve it, it has to be this much better than the current solution. And now we invite all of you within ARUP to self-organize into teams and to come up with solutions. And then we're going to evaluate these solutions through a combination of maybe crowdsourced evaluation, leadership evaluation, maybe third-party evaluation. And we're going to come up with the best ideas. And then we're going to invite employees that came up with the best ideas to help us incubate these. We're going to create prototypes. We're going to do pilots. We're going to see how they work. And then those things that are successfully incubated, we might even invite the people that did the incubation to be involved in the acceleration team, to take these to the market and to try them out and to generate new sources of revenue. So I think that I'm a big believer in kind of self-organization, kind of creative destruction, chaos theory sort of thing. And I think that, if you put some discipline around this. So, when I did some work for MetLife, what I found is that while MetLife was not an innovative organization based upon what their employees said and what their customers said, I found that there were some great innovations that had occurred despite the odds or against the odds. So I did some research as to why those people succeeded. And what you found is that there was this champion within the organization. It wasn't a leader. It was kind of a mid-level person that said, I don't care whether or not I get paid to be innovative. I'm going to be innovative because I want to be innovative. And so they kind of drove a process, self-organized, got people involved, started to solve problems that then, against the odds, became successful. And so what we told MetLife is we said, look, do you want to have all of your innovation be contingent upon these very few random people that are going to succeed despite the odds? Or do you want to enable more people to be successful in innovation? They said, well, we want to allow more people. So I said, okay, so what we need to do is take what worked with this one person and apply it across the organization. And so this is this innovation challenge. And so what MetLife does today is MetLife has a team called the Innovation Support Team. And the Innovation Support Team doesn't innovate anything. What they do is they go to a business leader and they say, okay, tell me your top 3 problems in your business. All right? Now let's select one of those which we think is the best to focus on having your employees come up with innovative solutions for. And we're going to run an 8-week process where we run an innovation challenge or a campaign. And we're going to come up with the best ideas and we're going to help you solve that problem. So this innovation support team, their only job is helping business leaders run innovation campaigns and challenges to solve problems. And to evaluate the problems, select the problems, and then to do pilots of the solutions that are developed. So I think individually you can try to be that lone wolf champion of innovation and try to do this yourself, and you could succeed. Okay? Or you could try to get the rest of ARUP to organize in such a way that you create an innovation support team that helps people. Now I know people say, well, Cosrow tried that and didn't work. And I was asked to evaluate all of Cosrow's ideas, which I did, and I met with Cosrow many times, all right? And I will tell you that Cosrow did not provide the innovation discipline that I'm talking about. If you read the last 4 chapters of my book, I go through the how of the innovation discipline, right? And that was not implemented, okay? You didn't identify specific problems that were problems of individual businesses. You didn't come up with the constraints around them. You didn't run innovation campaigns. You didn't kind of combine the good ideas to make better ideas. You didn't select the best ideas and then incubate them and do all of this. Again, one of the keys about fast, frequent, frugal failure, which is my criticism of Theranos, they take 10 years to come to market with something, right? 90-day cycles. How do you test your idea within 90 days to know whether or not you should continue, persevere, or pivot, right? And that's what you've got to be in this 90-day cycle of persevere, pivot decisions that you're making to move the ideas forward. So that's my view about ARUP. All right, if no others, then I will bid you adieu and I'll go teach my class.